The most controversial decision? On August 6th, 1945, at exactly 8:15 inches the morning, a single bomb destroyed an entire city in less than a second. Over 140,000 people died. 3 days later, it happened again in another city. 70,000 more people gone. But here's what most people don't know. The decision to drop the atomic bomb wasn't as simple as you think. Today, we're uncovering the real reasons why America made the most controversial decision in military history. By the summer of 1945, World War II had been destroying the world for 6 long years. In Europe, Nazi Germany had finally surrendered in May. The war there was over. But in the Pacific Ocean, Japan absolutely refused to give up. They kept fighting, no matter how many battles they lost. American forces had been island hopping across the Pacific, fighting some of the bloodiest battles humanity had ever seen. Places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa became names that represented pure horror. And with each battle, one thing became crystal clear. The Japanese military would rather die than surrender. Every single soldier fought until they were killed. There was no white flag. There was no giving up. President Harry Truman was facing an impossible situation. The question wasn't whether to end the war. Everyone desperately wanted that. The question was, how do you force an enemy to surrender when they've proven, again and again, that they will never quit? How do you end a war against an opponent who sees death as more honorable than defeat? The answer would change warfare forever. It would spark debates that continue to this very day. But to truly understand why America dropped the atomic bomb, we can't just look at one moment in time. We need to understand the complete picture. The military strategy, the politics, the casualties, and the desperate desire to end the deadliest war in human history. This isn't a simple story of good versus evil. This is a story about impossible choices, unimaginable weapons, and a decision that would kill hundreds of thousands of people instantly, but potentially save millions more. So let's go back to 1945 and discover what really happened. Chapter 2: Japan will never surrender. To understand why America made this decision, you first need to understand what they were up against. The Japanese military mindset was completely different from anything America had faced before. Let me show you exactly what I mean. In April 1945, the Japanese military launched a new strategy that shocked the entire world. They started using kamikaze attacks. Now, you might have heard this term before, but let me explain what it actually meant. Kamikaze pilots would deliberately crash their planes, loaded with explosives, directly into American ships. These weren't accidents. These weren't desperate last-minute decisions. These were planned, organized suicide missions. Over 3,800 Japanese pilots volunteered to fly these missions, knowing they would die. They wrote goodbye letters to their families. They performed ceremonies before takeoff, and then they flew their planes directly into American warships. The results were devastating. 34 American ships were sunk, and hundreds more were damaged. Thousands of American sailors died from these attacks. Think about what this meant. This wasn't an army that was getting desperate and making mistakes. This was an army that had culturally accepted death as a strategy. American commanders realized they weren't just fighting soldiers, they were fighting an entire nation that had been taught that surrender was the ultimate shame. But the kamikaze attacks were just the beginning. Let's talk about Okinawa, because this battle changed everything. Okinawa is a small island, just 340 miles from mainland Japan. American military planners thought capturing it would take a few weeks at most. They were completely wrong. The battle for Okinawa lasted 82 brutal days. American casualties were enormous. Over 12,000 soldiers killed and 38,000 wounded. But the Japanese losses were absolutely catastrophic. Approximately 100,000 Japanese soldiers died. And here's the most disturbing part. Between 40,000 and 150,000 Okinawan civilians also died in the fighting. Japanese soldiers hid in caves and tunnel systems, fighting to the absolute last man. When they ran out of ammunition, they used swords. When they were too injured to fight, they would detonate grenades. killing themselves and any nearby Americans. Not a single large unit surrendered. They fought until every soldier was dead. But even worse was what happened to the civilians. The Japanese government had told Okinawan civilians that American soldiers were monsters who would torture and kill them. Believing this propaganda, thousands of civilians committed suicide rather than be captured. Entire families jumped off cliffs together. Parents killed their own children and then themselves. American soldiers were horrified. They tried to convince civilians that they wouldn't be harmed, but the propaganda was too strong. This wasn't a normal war anymore. This was something much darker. Chapter 3. The Invasion Nightmare. After Okinawa, American military planners sat down and did the math. And what they calculated was absolutely terrifying. If capturing one small island cost 12,000 American lives and took 82 days of non-stop fighting, what would happen when they invaded mainland Japan? The numbers they came up with were nightmarish. The planned invasion of Japan was given the code name Operation Downfall. It would be split into two massive attacks. The first, called Operation Olympic, would invade the southern island of Kyushu in November 1945. The second, Operation Coronet, would attack the main island of Honshu near Tokyo in March 1946. This would be the largest amphibious invasion in human history. It would make D-Day look small by comparison. The United States was preparing to send over 1 million soldiers to invade a nation of 70 million people who had been taught that death was better than surrender. Military experts created casualty estimates. The numbers varied, but they were all horrifying. Conservative estimates predicted 500,000 American casualties, with at least 100,000 deaths. More realistic estimates went up to 1 million American casualties. Some military analysts feared the numbers could go even higher. But American casualties were only part of the picture. Japanese casualties would be catastrophic beyond imagination. Military planners estimated that millions of Japanese soldiers would die. But even worse, they predicted that millions of Japanese civilians would also be killed. Some estimates suggested that up to 10 million Japanese people could die during an invasion. Why would civilian casualties be so high? Because the Japanese government was preparing to turn every citizen into a soldier. They created a program called The Glorious Death of 100 Million. The plan was to arm every man, woman, and child in Japan with whatever weapons they could find: rifles, swords, sharpened bamboo spears. Anything. The entire population would fight to the death. Japanese schoolchildren were being trained to strap explosives to their bodies and throw themselves under American tanks. Women were being taught to fight with bamboo spears. The elderly were being organized into suicide units. The Japanese government was preparing for the complete destruction of their nation rather than accept surrender. Here's a detail that really shows how seriously America took these casualty predictions. The United States military ordered 500,000 Purple Heart medals. Purple Hearts are given to soldiers who are wounded or killed in combat. They manufactured 500,000 of them in preparation for the invasion of Japan. Want to know something incredible? They made so many Purple Hearts in preparation for the invasion that never happened, that America still has some of those original medals in storage. Every Purple Heart given to wounded American soldiers from 1945 until today, through Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and every other conflict. Many of them came from that original batch made for the invasion of Japan that never occurred. Chapter 4. The Manhattan Project. While American forces were fighting across the Pacific, something else was happening back in the United States. Something so secret that even Vice President Harry Truman didn't know about it until he became president. It was called the Manhattan Project, and it was the most expensive and secretive program in American history. The Manhattan Project began in 1942 with one terrifying goal: create an atomic bomb before Nazi Germany could. Scientists knew that atomic weapons were theoretically possible. They also knew that German scientists were brilliant and were probably working on the same thing. It became a race against time. Whoever created the atomic bomb first would win the war. The project cost $2 billion. That might not sound like much today, but in 1,940 seconds money, that was an absolutely massive amount. In today's dollars, that's over $30 billion. To put that in perspective, America spent more money on the Manhattan Project than on the development of tanks, artillery, and many other weapon systems combined. Over 130,000 people worked on the Manhattan Project at secret facilities across the United States. There were major laboratories in Los Alamos, New Mexico, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington. But here's the incredible part. Most of the workers had absolutely no idea what they were building. The project was so secretive that people working on one part weren't allowed to know what people in another building were doing. The scientific director was a brilliant physicist named J. Robert Oppenheimer. Working under him was some of the greatest scientific minds in history: Enrico Fermi, who created the first nuclear reactor, Niels Bohr, one of the founders of quantum physics, and many others. Even Albert Einstein provided early theoretical work, though he wasn't directly involved in the building of the bomb. These scientists faced incredible challenges. They weren't just trying to create a new weapon. They were trying to split the atom itself and harness the fundamental forces of the universe. No one had ever done anything like this before. They were literally inventing entirely new fields of science and engineering from scratch. By early 1945, Nazi Germany had been defeated, but the project continued because Japan was still fighting. The question was, would the bomb actually work? On July 16th, 1945, in the desert of New Mexico, they found out. The test was called Trinity. At 5:29 inches the morning, the first atomic bomb in history was detonated. The explosion was beyond anything anyone had imagined. The fireball was brighter than the sun. The heat was so intense that sand in the desert turned into glass. The mushroom cloud rose 7.5 miles into the sky. The explosion could be seen from 200 miles away. Windows broke 120 miles away. Robert Oppenheimer, watching the test from a bunker 10 miles away, later said that a line from Hindu scripture came to his mind: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He knew in that moment that they had created something that would change human history forever. Chapter 5: The Decision and Aftermath. President Truman received the news about the successful Trinity test while he was in Potsdam, Germany, attending a conference with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. He now possessed the most powerful weapon ever created, and he had to decide whether to use it. The decision wasn't made lightly. Truman held multiple meetings with his military advisors, scientists, and cabinet members. Everyone understood the magnitude of what they were discussing. Some argued for a demonstration. Detonate a bomb in an unpopulated area to show Japan what America possessed. But others argued that Japan might not surrender even after seeing a demonstration, and America only had 2 bombs ready. On July 26th, 1945, America, Britain, and China issued the Potsdam Declaration. It was an ultimatum to Japan: surrender unconditionally, or face prompt and utter destruction. The declaration didn't specifically mention the atomic bomb, but the message was clear. Japan's response came quickly. They rejected the ultimatum completely. They would continue fighting. That rejection sealed the decision. On August 6th, 1945, at 8:15 a.m., an American B-29 bomber called the Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb nicknamed Little Boy on the city of Hiroshima. The bomb exploded 1,900 feet above the city with a force of 15,000 tons of TNT. The temperature at ground zero reached over 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the sun. In an instant, everything within a 1-mile radius was completely vaporized. People simply ceased to exist, not killed but erased. Buildings were turned into dust. The blast wave traveled at hundreds of miles per hour, destroying everything for miles. Fires erupted across the city, creating a firestorm that burned for hours. By the end of the day, over 70,000 people were dead. By the end of the year, radiation sickness would bring the death toll to approximately 140,000. Japan's military still refused to surrender. 3 days later, on August 9th, America dropped a second atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki. This bomb, called Fat Man, killed approximately 40,000 people immediately, with the death toll eventually reaching about 70,000. Finally, on August 15th, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast to the Japanese people. It was the first time most Japanese citizens had ever heard their emperor's voice. The most devastating war in human history was finally over. World War II had ended, but at a terrible cost. So why did America drop the atomic bomb? The answer is complex. It was dropped to end the war immediately and save potentially millions of lives, both American and Japanese, that would have been lost in an invasion. It was dropped to justify the massive expense of the Manhattan Project. It was dropped to demonstrate American power to the Soviet Union, which was becoming a rival. And yes, there was also an element of revenge for Pearl Harbor and the brutal treatment of American prisoners of war. The atomic bomb ended World War II, but it also started a new era, the Atomic Age, where humanity now possessed the power to destroy itself completely. Outro: The Legacy. On August 15th, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's acceptance of surrender terms in a radio broadcast. For most Japanese citizens, this was the first time they heard their emperor's voice. World War II, which had affected millions of people across multiple continents, reached its conclusion. The atomic weapons ended the war and fundamentally changed international relations. They demonstrated a level of destructive capability that transformed military thinking. The decision to employ these weapons continues to generate scholarly debate and historical analysis. President Truman and his advisors believed their choice would shorten the war. Military estimates suggested that a conventional invasion could have resulted in extensive casualties on both sides. From this perspective, the atomic weapons represented an alternative that brought the conflict to a rapid conclusion. However, historians continue to examine whether other options existed. Some scholars argue that Japan's situation by mid-1945 suggested surrender might have occurred through other means. These questions remain subjects of ongoing academic discussion and historical research. What remains clear is that August 1945 marked a significant turning point. The Atomic Age began, leading to developments that shaped the Cold War period. Today, multiple nations maintain nuclear arsenals, with modern weapons far exceeding the power of those used in 1945. Hiroshima and Nagasaki have been rebuilt and now function as vibrant modern cities. They also serve as important centers for peace, education, and international dialogue about preventing future conflicts. Understanding this history provides context for contemporary discussions about nuclear policy and international security. The events of 1945 continue to influence how nations approach questions of military technology and diplomatic relations. What are your thoughts on this historical moment? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you found this video informative, please subscribe to Warfront Stories for more historical content. Enable notifications to stay updated with new videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.